So, Derwin, what do you know about our 21st president of the United States, Chester A. Arthur?
I want him to be the mascot of a cereal for children.
Oh my God. We should just start there. I know what you're alluding to. The dude had the best facial hair
Hmm.
of any president. Abraham Lincoln enthusiast be damned. If you have not seen this man's mutton chops, you have not led a full life. Full disclosure, when I get out of the army, I am growing those mutton chops. I'm bringing mutton chops back out of respect for Chester A. Arthur.
You would look good with mutton chops, Pete.
By the way, you could pull this off. You have the facial hair. All you gotta do is just do a reverse goatee. It's like hair everywhere but on the chin.
It's that centuries of like poor Irish coming out. Yeah, it happens.
Oh, dude, you need to bring it back. So at the very least, I can see your facial hair and be like, "Did that look good on me?" I'm gonna essentially use you as like a test subject.
It's
For those of
okay.
you only listening, Derwin is growing a great COVID beard right now.
Yup.
All right. So we're going to roll right into this fellow. We're going to talk about before he was president, also known on this show as things we read on Wikipedia. This week, though, I'm going to give some shout outs to some people who helped make me sound extra not dumb this week. So there is a really good book called The Unexpected President by Scott S. Greenberger. And there's also the wonderful Miller Center. The Miller Center has helped me out on every episode we've done so far. It's an aggregation of academic articles about our presidents, and it is a very easy read. So, Chester Alan Arthur was born on October 5th, 1829, in Fairfield, Vermont. Or was he?
Not
Dumb,
Ohio.
dumb, dumb. I know. We are breaking trend. We're not talking about an Ohio president. In fact, are we even going to be talking about an American president this week? Because we have a birther conspiracy. It was of wild speculation whether or not our 21st president was even born in America. I think it was like our first 5 presidents legally weren't born in America either, but I digress. Point is, we were past that point when America had been a country for a minute, when we could officially start doing birther conspiracies.
So this is kind of a common theme in American politics, then, is birther conspiracies.
I think it's really just Chester Arthur and Barack Obama so far. So there is some validity. I mean, it's stupid, by the way. Every birther conspiracy theory is stupid, but the validity to this rumor that Chester Arthur was born in Canada was that he's from a town, Fairfield, Vermont, which I never heard of before researching this guy. But his father, 100% not born in America.
Sure.
His mother is an American. She's very dead. If you didn't text from the talking about a guy born in 1829, she dead. But his mother was an American citizen who had moved to Quebec to be a teacher, and she met Chester Alan Arthur, and they decided to move to America, and then they had children all around the Northeast. So the fact is, his parents met in Canada. His father is an immigrant, and there's this weird, antiquated idea that you gained your citizenship from your father back in the day. Even if he'd been born in Canada, he could still be an American citizen because his mom's American. But his critics didn't really care about that. Again, it's all about the dad. So his father was hugely instrumental in his political career. He was a preacher. More importantly, he was an abolitionist preacher. And the reason why they moved every couple of years was because he kept getting scared out of, well, not scared, kept getting pushed out of town. Because while we'd all like to think we would be abolitionists if we were alive under an era of slavery, it was pretty unpopular, even in states where slavery was outlawed. So his father was an abolitionist. He was also apparently a serious fire and brimstone preacher that created a lot of divide between him and Chester. So Chester A. Arthur decided to become a lawyer. He went to Union College in Schenectady, New York, and eventually did become a lawyer in New York City. So we got a guy who, again, from the sticks of Vermont, moves to a big city, becomes a lawyer, and really made a name for himself in civil rights trials. Derwin, you've heard of him, Rosa Parks, right?
Yes, the lady who didn't want to give up her seat on the bus. Yes.
I learned about a woman named Elizabeth Jennings, who was Rosa Parks 100 years before Rosa Parks launched the Montgomery bus boycott. So Elizabeth Jennings was a teacher in New York City, and she was running late for church where she played the organ. So she and a friend hopped onto a streetcar and did not check to see whether or not it was for whites or coloreds. And immediately the conductor started freaking out, saying, "You can't ride on this." She's like, "Dude, there's literally no law that says I can't. You just put a sign up there and say I can't." And he was like, "No, no, no, no. We're too full. You'll upset the other people." So she was like, "Again, I'm not leaving. I'm running late for church, dude. Like, get out of my face." So the conductor and a cop that was on there threw her off, soiled her dress, and smashed her bonnet. Elizabeth Jennings was not having any of this, so she sued. Well, she went to trial in order to sue this streetcar company. Her lawyer was Chester A. Arthur.
That's
Chester A.
cool.
Arthur was 24 years old at the time. What did you do when you were 24? I didn't play a part in desegregating New York.
I drank in Army barracks quite a bit when I was 24.
Well, I went to basic training, so, oh no, I was in the AIT at the time.
Yeah.
Either way, I was not helping to desegregate a state's public transportation. It was not that single trial that desegregated New York public transportation, but it was cited as an example in several others. New York public transportation was not officially desegregated in 1861, but Chester Arthur and Elizabeth Jennings did not hurt the cause. In addition, there's the Lemon slave case, which held that slaves being transferred to a slave state through New York would be emancipated.
That's cool.
That's 100% cool. Again, this guy was just a boss as a young lawyer, but it's really important to note that all of these incredible things were happening at the beginning of his career as a lawyer and the beginning of his career as a politician eventually. You see this really idealistic, open-minded person who really cared about civil rights for Americans, because this is something of a redemption story. So during this time, he also met and started courting Nell Arthur, a stunningly beautiful woman from Virginia. By the way, look up pictures of her. Our boy Chester did all right for himself. If they cast Keira Knightley in the biopic someday, they would not be off. So the two of them had 3 children after they got married in 1859. The next big point in Chester A. Arthur's pre-presidential career is a very unfortunate situation called the Civil War. Hey, did I mention his stunningly beautiful wife was from Virginia? Boy, did that create some tension in the bedroom, I bet. All right. I'm not actually entirely far off with this assessment. So Chester A. Arthur was made a brigadier general in the New York militia. He never saw combat. I think that was a compromise with his wife. It's like, I promise not to kill any of your cousins because that would make Thanksgiving super awkward. But he was still an inspector general in the New York militia. And one of his responsibilities, actually one of his many responsibilities, was making sure that the soldiers from New York had uniforms, clothes, places to stay. He also starts to make a name for himself after the Civil War because he was this groundbreaking lawyer. He was the inspector general for the New York militia. New York at the time is the most populated state in the country. And because of the Civil War, the Republican Party is looking real cool right now. Everybody wants to get on that train. So Chester Arthur begins to get involved in New York Republican Party politics. He's extremely charming, charismatic person. Did I mention he's kind of bougie as well?
No, you did not.
If you read about the guy, there's plenty of details about the fact that he owned over 80 pairs of pants. He had those incredibly stylish mutton chops, which at the start of our show we pointed out really cool. Bought the finest jewelry from Tiffany's for his wife. Maintained that relationship after that whole she's from Virginia. He was part of the Union. So he's making connections. And one of those connections is a young congressman named Roscoe Conkling. Take a second just to appreciate how amazing that name is.
I feel like Roscoe should be selling used Toyotas in the backwoods of like Michigan somewhere.
I mean, I'm sure there's a Roscoe out there doing that.
Yeah.
In our last episode, we talked about Warren G. Harding and how he was basically made into the president by a very sketchy dude named Harry Dougherty, who was the Ohio Republican kingmaker. My instinct was that Roscoe Conkling was going to be the Harry Dougherty to our guy Chester A. Arthur. And he really kind of was. I mean, like, he is sort of the villain of our story. At the very least, he's the devil on Arthur's shoulder. But the guy also helped draft the 14th and 15th Amendment. He was a fierce abolitionist, and he was the most powerful Republican in New York, and Chester A. Arthur became his lieutenant. So one of the few offices that Chester A. Arthur actually held in his lifetime. This guy was never a congressman, never a representative or a senator or a governor. is that he was the customs collector of the Port of New York, which is not a position that exists anymore. That's probably modified. But the point is, it was the highest paid job in the country. Let me rephrase that. It was tied with President of the United States for the highest paid job. It was what every New Yorker would dream of. So he is spoiling his wife, he is spoiling his kids, and he is living the high life as the king of New York for a couple years. The customs collector of the Port of New York is actually a federally appointed position. He got that position from Ulysses S. Grant, who was a very powerful Republican. And we're going to talk about another thing that's extremely important to Chester A. Arthur's life and legacy, which is the spoils system. Now, the spoils system was essentially, you scratch my back, I will scratch yours. And it is extremely important to Chester A. Arthur and Roscoe Conkling because they were considered to be stalwart Republicans. So the stalwarts believed in the spoil system. They said, you know what? If I'm going to campaign for you, if I'm going to make donations to you, you're going to get me a federal job. So he got this position because he seriously supported Ulysses S. Grant as president. But as we know, you're only president for a finite period of time. And Rutherford B. Hayes, also from Ohio, became president. And he was someone who was trying to remove the spoil system. And he forced Chester A. Arthur out of his position. So he lost his super duper wealthy position in 1878. So many numbers. For those of you who don't know, I'm numerically dyslexic sometimes. Especially
it's
when I'm
okay.
talking
You're
about the
handsome,
past.
Pete. It doesn't matter.
I make up for it. And I can also read Wikipedia very well and make it sound like I know what I'm talking about.
There you go.
So in 1880, an extremely important election is coming up, especially considering how divided the Republican Party is at the time. They ultimately realize amongst the half-breeds and the stalwarts that no one can agree on a candidate. So they wound up picking an obscure little congressman, also from Ohio, named James Garfield.
Real quick, when you say half-breeds, what do they mean by half-breeds?
A half-breed is a Republican who didn't believe in the spoils system.
Got it.
I know, it has not aged well. Much of this story hasn't aged well, and we haven't even gotten to Chester A. Arthur as president yet.
Oh, man.
So let me just make sure that there is a nice big asterisk next to half-breed to explain that's Republicans who did not believe in the spoils system. Absolutely. Thank you very much. So James A. Garfield becomes president, and we'll talk about him later. He's a great character too.
Sure.
There is someone who did not think he was a very great character, and that was Charles Guiteau, who is the creepiest presidential assassin we have ever had. Oh, spoilers. James A. Garfield gets assassinated. Charles Guiteau loved the spoil system at first because he thought if he campaigned hard enough for James A. Garfield that he could be made, well, it was called the council at the time, but essentially get a job at the embassy as an ambassador for France or Austria. Now, this man was crazy. He was homeless and did not speak French or German. So he just thought, hey, if I go out and give big speeches about why James A. Garfield is the greatest president ever and he gets elected, I have to get elected to some kind of position. It's the spoils system, baby. He did not get either position. He was laughed off by James A. Blaine, who was the Secretary of State. So Charles Guiteau did what any sane person would do. He shot James A. Garfield in the back.
That seems intense.
It is. It gets worse, by the way. We'll maybe to get in more detail about James A. Garfield's horrible death, because he was not killed by the bullet. He was killed by the doctors who spent months trying to find the bullet before people thought about sterilizing their tools.
Oh, no.
It took months for James A. Garfield to die. And who was sitting on the wings waiting for him to die, crying his eyes out? Our boy Chester A. Arthur.
Oh, it comes full circle.
Yeah, so it doesn't help that Charles Guiteau proclaimed after he shot James A. Garfield, I am the stalwart of the stalwarts, and Arthur is president. So Chester A. Arthur, the vice president for James A. Garfield, was a wildly unpopular, unpredicted choice that the country hated. They thought he was the most crooked politician. If anyone knew his name, it was because he was Roscoe Conkling's second in command, and Roscoe Conkling was considered to be the most crooked machine politician there is. No one thought Chester A. Arthur would be a good president, except for one lady, and I kind of love her. Julia Sand. She was an invalid who was unable to get out of bed. She was partially deaf, but she was a huge political junkie. At a time when women couldn't vote,
Huh.
she would sit in bed all day reading all the newspapers, and she was extremely spun up on Chester A. Arthur and his story. So she decided to write a few letters to the then vice president that opens with this: "The hours of Garfield's life are numbered. Before this meets your eyes, you may be president. The people are bowed in grief. But do you realize it? Not so much because he is dying, as because you are his successor." Today, that would just be a tweet. When there are 55 million Americans and letters are the main way of getting information out there, these letters reached our vice president and they really touched him. Again, she opened with that, but she also said, "Great emergencies awaken generous traits which have been laid dormant for half a life." She knew what a great lawyer he was. She knew that he was groundbreaking in terms of civil rights in New York. She knew that he was a celebrated administrator when he was a brigadier general in the Civil War. She goaded this guy. Don't live down to your critics' worst expectations of you. She wrote over 20 letters to Chester Arthur while he was president, and most historians consider her to be the poke that he needed to become great. And I mean great, because we're going to get to some of his accomplishments. This guy's an underrated president, but this is the last one. "Your name is now in the annals of history. You cannot slink back into obscurity if you would. 100 years hence, schoolboys will recite your name in the list of presidents and tell of your administration. And what shall posterity say? It is for you to choose whether your record shall be written in black or gold. For the sake of your country, for your sake, and for the sake of all who have ever loved you, let it be pure and bright."
Wow.
Try putting that in a tweet. As we pointed out, James A. Garfield eventually kicked the bucket, and Chester A. Arthur was sworn in his brownstone in New York City as the 21st president of the United States. So everyone's expecting him to be the spoil system enthusiast, a puppet for Roscoe Conkling. What a surprise that his first act as president was to endorse the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act. This said, hey, you know how unqualified people got to be civil servants in all departments of the government? What if we made some sort of entry level exam? What if we actually had to evaluate all of our civil servants to see if they, can do their job?
Can they walk and breathe in a straight line at the same time?
Boom, State Department.
Yeah.
All right. And he didn't just sign off on this. And immediately afterwards, he appointed members of the Civil Service Commission, which is still in effect today. So right off the bat, he bit the hand that fed him for the betterment of our country. Kind of love the guy for that.
That's cool.
But wait, there's more. Following the Civil War, we had 700 vessels, all made of wood, by the way, not the sturdiest of material. But by the time Chester A. Arthur got sworn in as president, we had 52 vessels left. Chester A. Arthur pushed the Department of, the War Department at the time, to, you know what? There's also steel. Steel can float. So how about we make all of our ships out of steel? Because the rest of the world's kind of laughing at us right now. We look like we're Pirates of the Caribbean.
Yeah.
He continued his progressive nature by overturning the court-martial of Johnson Whitaker, a West Point candidate who was being court-martialed for reasons that were eventually seen as just being racial bias, and urged Congress to increase funding for the education of Indigenous Americans in 1884. Now, there are some people that probably don't like Chester A. Arthur very much, and among them, very ardent Mormons, probably not big fans of the guy. So, polygamy is illegal in America?
Yep.
We can thank our boy Chet for that. So in 1882, the Edmunds Act was passed, which made polygamy a federal crime. The guy just not a fan of multiple wives. And now we have to get to the white elephant in the room that we don't like to talk about.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of the Chinese Expulsion Act?
I have not.
Yeah, the name kind of explains itself. So anti-Chinese sentiments were very high in the mid-19th century, and a lot of really stupid people said it's because of all the Chinese immigrants that came in here. Congress came up with a law, creatively titled the Chinese Expulsion Act, which would ban Chinese immigrants from coming into our country for 20 years. Chester A. Arthur was not a really racist dude, said no, and he vetoed it. However, at the time, the Democrats controlled Congress, so he was having to fight with this constant push of, no, we need to keep the Chinese out of America. So ultimately, he did have to ratify, not necessarily have to, let's be honest, the guy could have vetoed it again, but he did wind up ratifying the Chinese Expulsion Act of 1882, but he got Congress to whittle it down to 10 years. So baby steps. All right. And we're going to, before we start to wrap things up, I am going to talk about another thing else that I do not like about Chester A. Arthur. The guy redecorated the White House.
Yeah.
That seems like a little thing, but we've established that Chester A. Arthur is a man of refined taste. And when he moved into the White House, he thought, my word, everything here is just so obsolete. For a guy who was known for cutting down on wasteful government spending, he spent thousands of dollars redecorating the White House to his standard. Like, he brought in people from Tiffany's in New York to make the White House all kinds of shiny, which probably cost the taxpayers a bunch of money. And even worse, he got rid of a lot of artifacts from previous administrations. So we get to the election of 1884. Now, again, this guy served not even a full 4 years, because that whole James A. Garfield was president for a few months of them. But in 1880, the year that he was elected vice president, his wife, Nell Arthur, died tragically of pneumonia. His sister wound up taking over the responsibilities as hostess of the White House and
Sure.
raising his youngest daughter. And shortly after becoming president, Chester A. Arthur was diagnosed with Bright's disease, which at the time was a fatal kidney disease.
Oh, no.
So if you want to know why this guy did such a 180 on being a crooked political machine to someone who did a really good job as president, probably because he didn't have much to lose. He'd already
Yeah.
lost the love of his life, and
Yeah.
he was facing his own mortality very quickly. If he didn't accomplish more in his lifetime in the White House, it's probably because he was dying the whole
Yeah.
time. Now, in the era of dialysis, Bright's disease would not be the fatal illness that it is. But look at what happened to James Garfield. There were no good doctors back then. If you were diagnosed with a paper cut back then, it's like, well, it was nice knowing you. Dude partied like a rock star at the end, but he
Yeah.
made the country a better and less corrupt place in doing so. So when the 1884 election came up, he threw his hat in the ring, but very lackadaisically. So the Republican nomination went to James A. Blaine, former Secretary of State, but he wound up losing to a fella named Grover Cleveland, which I promise you, we will talk about him. So Chester A. Arthur moved back to New York to work at his old law firm, but unfortunately his health precluded him from being able to leave his house. So for the last year and a half of his life, he was bedridden, acting as a counsel for his old law firm. And on 18 November 1886, our boy Chet lost his battle with Bright's disease. Now, we talked at the beginning about how obscure Chester A. Arthur is, but there's a few reasons why. Before he died, he burned all of his personal documents, all of his records of being president, which means, unlike Ulysses S. Grant, we didn't have that best-selling memoir at the end. For some reason, he just did not think very highly of himself as president and wanted to burn the trail. But there were a few things he did not burn, and that was the letters that Julius Sands sent him. And those are currently in the Library of Congress for anyone to read, just in case you need to know what a real cheerleader looks like. And this is a quote that I'm going to end things on before we get to our questions. It would be hard indeed to better President Arthur's administration. And that was from Mark Twain. So it seems as though the author of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn was a fanboy. Now we get to the important questions. Derwin, do you think Chester A. Arthur deserves to be remembered more, or at least more fondly?
Probably more. Yeah, he sounds like he's flawed like all men are. But it sounds like he was just a solid, decent guy, right? Like he wasn't a purposefully bad guy, right? Which
He's not Warren G. Harding.
He's not Warren G. Harding. There's no like dead dancing girls or anything.
My personal opinion, I think we need a Mount Rushmore for very good presidents. Maybe not the greatest presidents, but if we could have like just a nice Mount Rushmore where it's like, hey, would you look at that? You know, he was a pretty good president.
Yeah, just a solid dude.
You know, just underrated. I mean, I might
Yeah.
not vote for him twice, but at least once.
Yeah.
And now everyone's favorite question. In honor of Warren G. Harding and his nickname, Jerry, what do you think Chester Arthur should have nicknamed his penis?
The barrel chest. I don't know. I got nothing on this one, man.
All right. Well, I think you'll appreciate my contribution as you are a big Kevin Smith fan.
Ah.
The dude owned 80 pairs of trousers. I think he'd call it the trouser snake.
Yeah, it's good. I like that.
Well, that wraps up another episode of the Dead Presidents Society. Thank you very much for joining us. And if you're in the mood for a nice beach read, The Unexpected President by Scott S. Greenberger is a fantastic place to start.
Thanks, Pete.